Well, hello there, and welcome to Tea Talks, our Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum webinar series where we explore the myths, truths, and untold stories of the Boston Tea Party. My name is Josiah George, and I'm on the creative team here at the museum, and I welcome you back. If you've been following us month by month, we did take the summer off, and we are back. It is September, and we're also bringing back our friend who we began this whole series with. And so if you've been covering those Tea Talks with us, you know that we have followed a number of different elements surrounding that iconic historic event, from the specific details to the event itself, to the anecdotes of those involved. And we've explored the tea crisis here in Boston leading up to the tea's destruction. And then we watched the fallout and the aftermath that forever changed the course of America. And so for this Tea Talks, we are thrilled to welcome back to the museum here our own Tea Master, Bruce Richardson. Hi, Bruce, how are you?
Hi, Josiah. Good to see you tonight.
Yes, you as well. Now, friends, Bruce has been on the forefront of the American tea renaissance for the last 30 years. He's the author of a number of books. We've got a couple of them here. Tea Etiquette, The Great Tea Rooms of Britain, New Tea Companion, and of course, our favorite here at the museum, Bruce, The Social History of Tea. I have my autographed copy here. Now, he wrote this with his friend and colleague, Jane Pettigrew, who he's worked on a number of projects with. Bruce serves as contributing editor for Tea Time magazine, and certainly, of course, not the least of all mentions, is our own tea master here at the museum. But he is also the master of his own business there, blender of Elmwood Inn Fine Teas of Danville, Kentucky. So from one commonwealth to another, hello again. Now, Bruce, over the last 30 years, you've been in this tea culture, and you'll, I have to put the shameless pun in here, you've actually poured the world over in pursuit of the almighty tea leaf. And you've had the privilege of visiting some of the greatest tea farms in the world, some of which are in some truly amazing locations. And I think you're going to show us some of those tonight.
Right.
And I'd like to emphasize, I've mentioned Bruce as a tea master. So Bruce, maybe walk us through a little bit. It's a tea sommelier, if you will. What is that title?
Well, that's something that's fairly new. And as a matter of fact, there are just a few certifications around the world for that specific title. And we, for the World Tea Academy, we create the tasting kits for all the educational classes that go into that program. So they're created here in Kentucky for all those students all over the world who are looking for that kind of certification. So, but there is no such thing as a designated certification for a tea master. Sure. It's something that happens after many years, and where you have to consider yourself not as knowing mastered everything about tea, right? Because I learn something every day about tea. So we are always on the lookout for new tea education and learning new experiences. So tonight, as we go through the program, I'm going to be sharing a lot of those experiences that I've encountered to maybe encourage folks in our audience to get out and see the world when we have opportunity and visit tea folks all over the world. Because tea will be your passport to all. Once you're part of the tea family, you have this instant passport that gives you entree to tea people all over the world.
Tea people, you hear that, everyone? And all over the world, but I mean, right here in Boston, I know you've certainly spent some time with and lent your expertise with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts, and of course, our own museum here.
Right.
I'm thrilled to have you back focusing on the tea of today, and we'll get into that momentarily. The last time that we had Bruce here, about a year ago, we had actually a number of programs. We first started out with our friend and colleague, Kelly Horan Galanti here at the museum, and we discussed the 5 teas that launched a revolution. Of course, I'm referring to the teas that were thrown overboard into Boston Harbor on December 16th, 1773. And those Sons of Liberty took that product from the East India Company and committed it here to the harbor. And with Liberty, speaking of Liberty, we also talked about Liberty teas. And those were those tea alternatives that the American colonists used during, say, the non-consumption efforts, non-importation efforts following the Townshend Acts of 1767. So then we had this wonderful look at the tea things of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, which was just fascinating. We also got to see some items from His Majesty King George III, and that the tea accoutrement was that was a really interesting look. We really enjoyed that, and I'm happy to say to our viewers that all of this is available for download on our Shopify page. So be sure to look that up and see how you can get caught up in the world of tea and Boston Tea Party. But we're great to bring you back here to the program. And so tonight we're discussing some of the processing steps involved with the various tea families. And that's white, green, black. So I'm looking forward to some insider info on the best way to taste and prepare both hot and cold, I believe, Bruce.
Right.
So like a professional. So take us into the world of tea today, Bruce.
Great, I'm glad to. Well, and I'll just tell you that tonight, as I begin, I'm drinking probably what you consider a Liberty tea, because this tea that I'm drinking is all herbal, and the ingredients are from Quebec, and it's amaranth, calendula, lemon balm, and a little bit of anise. And these are all teas that would have been gleaned from the herb gardens in Boston in 1773 and put into their teapots.
I bet that has a wonderful aroma.
It's just a great aroma, and of course it's caffeine free because there's no tea leaf in it at all. So that's what I'm drinking tonight as we begin our program, because if I was drinking caffeinated tea, I would be up maybe until after midnight tonight, because caffeine.
Well, I figured I would take one for the program. I am going to get into. I've got a couple of pots here steeping. I went with some Hyson green and your own personal blend here for the museum, Abigail's blend, named after Abigail tea.
So that's what we're gonna be drinking tonight. And your first lesson is that caffeine stays in your system 6.5 to 8 hours. So you have to count back from that if you're going to get any sleep at all. So here we go. You ready? And listen, Josiah, we encourage people to send us questions tonight. So go to the chat and ask any question. And there will be little pauses along the way where you will ask me those questions and pass them along to me. So go ahead and anytime you have a question, toss it into the bin. And then when we come to these little Q&A times, we'll take time to talk about those. So let's do that. Let's look first at where tea is grown. Here is a map of with the centerpiece of the birthplace of tea, which is China. Because as we talked about in the history of tea, thrown overboard in 1773 in Boston, remember we said all that tea came from China. That's the birthplace of tea. And so Yunnan province, which is in the southwest corner of China, just to the right of the Bay of Bengal, is where tea, we think, was birthed. And then the tea that came into Boston via the East India Company came from this area, which is towards Shanghai, what we now know as Shanghai. And this is these mountain areas here called, we have them listed here as Bohe, but the Mandarin name is Wuyi. This is the Wuyi Mountains, and the Singlo or Sunglo Mountains here. And these are just to the south of modern day Shanghai. So most of the tea came from here, was harvested, sent down river, and eventually in a couple of months got to the port of Canton. where it was loaded aboard ships that then made the long, arduous voyage to London. And then it was stored for way too long and finally made its way over in the summer of 1773 into Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and Charleston. So those were the tea parties that were held up and down the eastern seaboard.
And that's a long voyage just to get it to London before.
Well, yeah, the tea was harvested in the spring and it took it months to get down to Canton. And then they had to wait the arrival of the ships that came in around Christmas. So that April tea was packed on the board ship in Christmas, and then it would arrive nearly 10 months later in London. So long voyage to get it there in the 18th century. So here you have the 5 teas that were tossed into Boston Harbor. Now, this is a great trivia question for you. To know that of the 5 teas tossed into Boston Harbor in 1773, 3 of them were black and 2 of them were green. And the black teas were generically called bohea, which is a derivation of the Mandarin word wu yi. Somehow wu yi became bohea. I always say it's because the sailors bringing that tea all the way from Canton to London had a lot of time to drink rum, and somehow wu yi became bohea.
Yeah, sure.
That's how it became known as we see
And,
on this
teapot
here.
And the bohea, as I understand, in colonial America, then became the generic term for tea.
You would have, as this teapot that was made in Staffordshire English tells you, you may be just invited over just to have, they wouldn't even use the word tea sometimes. They would say, come over and have a cup of bohea. Mm-hmm. And that's immediately you knew that was tea. This was, by the way, the cheapest tea. So in the spring harvest, all the good teas were harvested as they always were. But all of a sudden you had this huge demand from the West for teas, and the Chinese really had to ramp up production. So although they were very focused on picking just the very best tea for consumption in their own country, all of a sudden you had this huge demand. And so rather than just picking a few of the newest flush of growth on the bush, they sometimes, after that first flush was harvested, they would go down and strip all the leaves off of that bush, which you would never do. But you had more tea leaves that then you could process and sell to the West. And so that's how they filled up the humongous amount of chests of teas that were needed to meet the demands of the West. So the majority of the tea, 240 out of 340 chests of tea on board the ships in Boston, were of that cheap tea. Well, if you wanted a good black tea, you would go to the next two, which was Kanggu, which is a derivation of the word kung fu. And we know kung fu in martial arts. It's a discipline. And if you have a discipline-made tea in the black form, it would be called Kanggu, or Souchong, which is a larger leaf black tea. So those were the 3. Hyson was the standard green tea of the day. It was Thomas Jefferson's favorite tea. George Washington drank quite a bit of it as well. And then on board for the very first time ever on the way to the colonies was this beautiful green tea from the Sunglo Mountains called Singlo. And some half chests of that were on board. Very expensive tea. And sadly, it never got to make its appearance in the New World, except floating on the waves in Boston Harbor on the morning of December 17th, 1773. So
quite a different flavor.
That's right. So those are the 5 teas: 3 blacks, 2 greens, all the way from China. And those were the teas that were brought in. So let's look at where today tea is harvested. Here you have the 2 of the largest producers of tea in the world, China, of course, and then India right below it. And then one of the largest exporters of tea not grower, but exporter of tea, is this beautiful island just off the coast of India. It was originally called Ceylon. Now it's called Sri Lanka. 22 million people live there, but it is a beautiful garden of tea, highlands and lowlands. We'll look at some pictures later from my travels in Sri Lanka. Vietnam is growing tea these days as well. And then the major tea grower in Africa is Kenya. So, and what you're seeing today because of climate change is you're seeing a lot of the tea producers in India starting to hedge their bets because of the heat that's there, moving a lot of their production, their gardens, from the hot arid lands of India to the upper highlands of Africa, especially places like Kenya and Uganda. So that's changing quite a bit today. We have a lot of tea grown, mainly green tea in Australia. The largest, and let me go back up here to, let's see, there's Vietnam, there's Japan. Oops, there's Japan. And then this little island here, which was originally called Formosa, now called Taiwan. We'll visit there tonight to see how oolongs are made. But the largest, we get most of our tea, well, 42% of our tea in America comes from none of those places. It comes from South America, from the country of Argentina. And it's because we drink so much iced tea here that we have to get it from Argentina, where it's mechanically harvested, grown in huge fields, and it's very, very cheap. So that's when you drink iced tea in a restaurant, often it's, you can be sure it came from Argentina. So let's look at the different tea families. We're going to start with tea in its purest form, and that is the white tea family. And here you see the new growth on the bush in China. You notice that the light colored leaves are the new flush of growth. And you can see them very well against the emerald green of the older leaves from the previous growth. So these are the only leaves and buds that will be harvested. This, I can look at this and tell this is a very early spring tea, probably in April in China, that they're harvesting this. And this could be the tea that's going to be made into white tea. Because you see these little buds right here? That is the baby of the leaf plant. That's the baby of the plant. This is it'll eventually open up into a leaf, but right now it's just a bud. So when the purest form of white tea is just taking those little buds and drying them in the sun. And this is what they will look like after they've been dried. It's very minimal oxidation. They're very delicately handled, so they won't be bruised, and they just are placed out into the sun. It can take up to 16,000 of these little buds to make a pound of this white tea from the Fujian province called silver needle, because it looks like a silver needle.
Yes, it does.
The other type form of white tea is Baimudan. What happens here is we take the two top leaves and the open bud. Here you see the buds here, and then the two leaves beneath it, and they have been placed out in the sun with minimal oxidation and dried. It makes a very light tea. Baimudan literally means white peony. So this is, when you go into a tea store today, you will often find Baimudan. If you have a lot of money, you can buy silver needle, but Baimudan is the cheaper of the two. So that pretty much covers the white tea family. It's not a big family, but let's go on to the green tea family. And here I introduce you to one of my tea growers in Kagoshima, Japan, which is the second largest tea growing area of Japan. And this is Master Sakamoto, and he is the third generation tea farmer at this farm. And so I visited him 2 years ago, and he makes all of my shade grown green teas, and he makes some senchas as well, makes our matcha for us. And we'll be looking at some of his teas here in just a little bit as well. Now, here we have we looked at the Wuyi Mountains and Singlo Mountains south of Shanghai. If you were to take the bullet train an hour due west outside of Shanghai, you'll come to Hangzhou. And at Hangzhou, is one of the classic tea growing areas of China. And I spent a week a couple of summers ago in this garden where Longjing or Longqing is grown. And we'll look tonight at how that tea is made. So how do you keep green tea green? A simple thing to remember about green tea versus black tea is that black tea is nothing more than green tea that has been oxidized. So that oxidation process of turning it brown or towards black or red brings it into the black tea family. Just like you would cut an apple, set it on the table, and come back to it in 30 minutes, it has oxidized. This is what happens with green tea when it becomes black tea. Well, if we want to make green tea stay green after the leaves are picked, we do one of two things usually. For instance, in Japan, we will steam that tea. And here you see a picture of a large tumbler that is opened up so you can see the teeth in there that tumble it. And steam will enter there, and that will kill the enzymes and keep it as a green tea that is then dried. If we want to, in China, we can fire it. So we can apply heat again to keep it as a green tea in the green form. So let's look at how this tea is produced. So here you see a short clip that I filmed in Hangzhou a few years ago when I was a guest at the World Global Tea Fair there in Hangzhou. And they had a demonstration of all these men coming out and drying tea, roasting it. And these are electric woks. Right. They'll take about 20 minutes to take the tea and press it against the side of these woks. And they always have to keep it moving so it won't burn. Occasionally, you'll see steam come up off of those. And that is the way they make this very flat leaf that we call Longjing or Longqing. So we call this pan-fired.
That is fascinating. And I imagine they get, very masterful at that. So do they do it by timing, or do they know by
they know the aroma? Yeah. Because they're huddled over that pan. Sure. And they can smell it. And they pretty much know by the aroma. This tea is at its peak right now. So they do this masterfully. The other thing to remember that these days, these teas, these green teas, are only harvested in the early spring. So these men do this for a few months in the spring, and then they go off and do other things, and then they have to come back. So we always pray that these men keep coming back to produce what is one of the 10 great teas of China, and we hope we never lose that artisanal knowledge that they have. Sure. Yeah. So one of the teas, as we said, that was tossed overboard in Boston, and this is a pan-fired green tea. It's called Hyson, and what you want to do with this is steep it at about 175 degrees for about 2 minutes, and then repeat. So do it again and again. So if you're going to make a black tea, often what we do is we'll steep it once and toss it. Green teas, a really good green tea, you can get multiple infusions out of that. And Hyson is one of those teas. Did you make some?
I did. Tonight? That's exactly what I have now. Here's a little product placement with our Abigail's tea room. Right?
Exactly.
Teapots.
Yeah.
And I really tried to make sure, that I was going a little bit lighter from in terms of the temperature. I have learned that from you, Bruce.
Well, and Josiah, I give that lesson to people every day, and I thought if I do nothing else, they can put this on my tombstone. He taught Americans how to make green tea because so many people come to me and they say, I don't like green tea, and it's all because they have put boiling water on it and have abused it. So green tea does not want boiling water. It wants water that's about 175 degrees.
It smells incredibly fresh.
It is, and there are notes in there that we call vegetative, so it smells like your garden. It'll smell like asparagus, all those things that your mother tells you to drink or eat are in there. So it's one of the healthiest things you can put into your body.
And yet with that, you might think, well, I'm about to eat a garden, but yet it's very, very light.
Yeah.
And so I chose this glass so that we can kind of see the color a little bit.
Mhm.
And then we did get a question regarding an opinion on clear glass cups or versus ceramic.
Well, it's whatever you want to do. When I boil my water, for instance, I use a clear teapot so I can see my water boil. So I know what when I don't have to use the thermometer on it. I can just tell by looking at it when the water is right. So if I'm at home in the morning making my black tea and I'm looking in here, I want to see a good rolling boil. But if I'm making something like a Hyson or that Longjing that we just saw them making in China, we're going to see just little rivulets of air bubbles start to come up. And that tells you that's the green tea temperature. So you need to know you and your water must become one, you see. So
and, someone asked a question here, what you mean by repeat, repeating the steeping.
Mm-hmm. So that means we're going to be talking about multiple infusions. So I'm going to say repeat that process. So steep it for 2 minutes, drink your tea. And see, if I was going to drink a green tea, see how small this is? This is the apparatus. And I'll talk more about that later, is every tea has its ritual. And green tea and oolongs always want to be made in smaller utensils. We'll get to that in just a little bit.
Now, one of our guests also just made a comment that they didn't see the cup that I was showing. So I don't know if it's because of our screen share. And I was simply holding up my my cup of green tea, which is I would say Bruce would approve of its color and aroma.
Right.
I hope I passed.
You did fine. So, and here, Josiah, are some antique pictures of what we think the tea making process might have looked like 200 or 300 years ago. You have to realize we Westerners were not allowed to go into country in China. We could go no farther than the port of Canton. So you had no Western eyes until the 1800s go into the tea gardens of China to actually witness tea growing or tea making. We had no idea. We could only conjecture or talk to people who had grown up there how tea was made. And so this is what we think it might have looked like. So let's go back. Look, this is green tea rolling. So here they are hand rolling those leaves into these little pellets that we see, that like the Hyson green tea or gunpowder green tea. Sometimes there was even a method of foot rolling. So we don't talk about that much more in the tea trade. But there was a very cheap tea in the time of Jane Austen. It was called Twankey, Twankey. And I believe I wrote about Twankey on one of the blogs on the Boston Tea Party Museum website. So this is foot rolling those tea leaves. Now here you see is something that looks similar to what we just saw in modern day Hangzhou. These are people who are doing the same thing. And you see they're using a charcoal fire or wood fire to heat the outdoor woks. Also, we have sifting going on. And this is still used today in some very high quality handmade teas where you take a bamboo tray and you have, just the way to flip it so that the chaff then comes off the top. This has been going on for centuries.
I was going to say, I have seen a modern video of a technique very similar.
Very same thing. And of course, between all these stages, you have the storage of tea between stages. This still goes on. I have a friend who named Eva Lee, who makes tea on the Big Island of Hawaii. And Eva, in her warehouse where she makes her tea, she has arranged a system of lifting up these trays that go up into the upper area of her warehouse while they're just resting there until she's ready to start the next day's production. And she lowers them back down and starts again.
Wow. Isn't that
So a lot of things really haven't changed in all these centuries. Now, here you have, like in Port of Canton, you would have these warehouses set up to take in all this tea that was brought in, and it would be stored. And you have to realize that it can get very, very hot there in the summertime. So this tea needs to be protected against vermin and against moisture. And these warehouses were called go-downs. And this go-down warehouse is in Canton. And you notice all these jars here? These are all porcelain jars. So they use these porcelain jars to protect them against the vermin and against any kind of moisture that might get into them. It's interesting that they were doing this back in the time of the Boston Tea Party, but in Japan in the late 1800s, this is about a picture from about 1876, almost a century after the Boston Tea Party. Look, these are still ceramic teas, and these were brought over from Japan to on board steamers into from Yokohama into San Francisco, and these teas would arrive in San Francisco, and these were often called ceramic teas, the teas that were inside, because they were in these ceramic jars. Well, the ceramic jars would just be tossed away. And I talked to someone from Smithsonian recently who said, oh, if we had these jars, they'd be worth thousands of dollars because they're a work of art. And
they are beautiful.
I was doing a tour of the Glesner House in Chicago about 3 years ago. Glesner House was built by H.H. Richardson, the same architect who did Trinity Church in Boston, one of the great architects of the 1800s. And lo and behold, at the bottom of the stairs was one of these ceramic pots that had once held tea. And so I asked the docent there, I said, well, tell me the provenance of this jar. She said, well, it says here, this is a Chinese water jar. I said, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's a Chinese tea jar for storing tea and transporting it. And so they were delighted to know what that beautiful thing was in their possession.
Well, and I imagine that was a moment that those of us that know you a little bit might have been to have you walk in and go, well, I know what that is. That's great.
So we talked about the tea being stored there in Canton, and then it would wait until Christmas until the ships arrived. And here they come into the port, and they are filled to the brim with tea. Now, this is from later. This is a clipper ship cargo hold. But here you can see how the tea was, this was laid out for tea. So at the very bottom, of course, you had ballast. And if you had any porcelain to go, you would always put it at the bottom too, because you wanted to weight it. You need to weight in these ships. Right. The tea didn't really weigh a lot, so it didn't give a lot of ballast. So you often had to add porcelain to the shipment in order to give it some weight. And the cheapest tea would always put at the bottom. So you can bet that every one of these lower layers was all bohea.
Right.
And then the Kongu and the Souchong here, the green teas would all be up here. And that's the way that the teas were stored. Of course, some of these chests would weigh up to 350 pounds. So this would be similar. This area right here would be similar to the hold of the ships there where Josiah is sitting tonight in Boston at the Boston Tea Party Ships Museum. And by the way, when you visit, you can go inside the hold and see how that tea was stored. And I know that our guests, Bruce, often, their eyes get big when we say, all right, the very hold that you're standing in would be filled to the upper deck from what you would call the floor to the pack. No room to move at all.
No.
Yeah. And the tea would have to be lifted up by winch and hoisted up on deck. So it was quite the thing. It took them a lot of manpower to pull that up onto the deck. And to think then they had to break it open with hatchets in order to get the tea out.
As many as 50 men per ship.
Right. So no small matter. So we've talked about first white tea, then we talked about green tea, and here are just a few steeping hints for when you make green tea. One is to always use cooler temperatures. And as we said, use smaller equipment and multiple infusions. Or you can cold steep. So tonight, I showed you my tea master in Japan, Master Sakamoto. This is some of his tea I put in here about an hour ago. And I put a heaping tablespoon of tea into a glass pitcher and put filtered tap water in there, and then put it into the refrigerator. So in the morning, we can take this out and drink this beautiful cold steeped green tea. It's the smoothest, most gentle green tea you've ever drunk in your life. And the great thing about this pitcher, it has a little filter built in right here. So when you pour, the leaves stay in here. But I want you to look at how, if you can see this, how the tea leaves have rehydrated. And they have come back to the size they were when they were growing on that bush in Japan. So if you have a tea ball at home, throw that away, because tea ball is nothing more than tea abuse. It's a straitjacket for tea leaves. And it doesn't let your tea completely infuse and release all the good flavors. So if you can set your tea free like this, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, and you're going to enjoy your tea drinking experience better. So this is cold infusion using what we call a tea flask.
Well, that is very inspirational, Bruce. Set your tea free. If you're looking to make your transition from coffee to tea, keep talking like that. You'll get a whole bunch of converts.
That's a bumper sticker, isn't it? Set your tea free.
And so you answered my question. I was about to say, would you then stir up those leaves in the morning before you?
You don't have to. It will naturally be perfect for you the next morning. And here's the other thing, Josiah, is we will drink this tea. We call this liquor. We drink this liquor and leave the leaves in there, and then we will fill it with water again for a second infusion. So you get a whole lot of tea for one spoonful of green tea leaves.
And Bruce, I've heard you use this phrase before in talking about tea, the journey. So from the first, say, pot or container there to the second one the next day or such, what is that journey? What are we looking for in terms of the flavor?
Well, one of the great things about drinking tea is it takes you on a journey. And so not so much in drinking this system, but in a few minutes, we're going to get to oolongs and talk about multiple infusions, maybe up to 16 times. And we'll talk more about the journey there. But tea can always surprise you. It can delight you with the flavors that it just keeps bringing to you. So it's a gift that keeps on giving. So take advantage of that. Allow the tea to take you on a journey every time you take it, you drink it. And be aware, we like to say, look deeply into your tea and think about the people who make your tea. So we look deeply into your cup and remember those people who make your tea before you drink it.
Well, and now certainly tonight, appreciate the images you've shared with us, both the historic and even a short video of the tea process today.
Sure.
Your big Q&A here has prompted a few questions, and so one of the questions is referencing the ceramic jars, the storage containers.
Mm-hmm.
Were they sealed to prevent air from getting in?
Yes, they were sealed, and they were probably wooden, and the Japanese are great about packaging, even today. And I've been into some Japanese tea stores today that still have not as big as ceramic tea jars, but smaller ones. And they will have a wooden inset at the top, and there'll be a cloth to go over that, and then a wooden inset on top of it, which keeps it sealed, and that'll all be wrapped up nice with a beautiful bow on top of it as well. But it's beautiful packaging. But yes, they are kept sealed like that to keep them fresh.
And on our end here at the museum, I think guests are often surprised to hear about the lead lining, the foil lining inside the tea chests
Sure.
that were sealed shut after they were filled, and that was to also, provide the tea to make its journey from one side of the world to the other, keep it fresh.
Keep the bugs out. Yeah.
Let's see. So just a shout out to Christine here. She's finding it very interesting. So we'll try to keep it so. And Cam has another question here. It says, can you address which teas cause the least amount of coloring on the teeth? I love my tea, but also love my teeth.
Well, there's no simple answer for that. I was at my dentist yesterday, and I have to get my teeth cleaned about 3 times a year. It's just those are tannins that are going to build up on your teeth. You may get fewer tannins if you're drinking green tea versus black tea, so that might be an answer for you.
All right, Cam. So that's maybe your answer. Time to switch to the green tea.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Let's see. Oh, she says thanks. Great. We're changing lives here.
Good. Well, today today is National Coffee Day.
Yes, it is.
And so we decided to do a mail out to our about 9,000 people in our newsletter list to say on National Coffee Day, we're going to invite you to leave the darkness and come to the light. So we will give you a special sale if you'll start buying tea. And so we hope a lot of people have left what we call the dark side, the tea world, the coffee world, and come over to tea today on National Coffee Day.
Well, before this evening began, my colleague says, "Hey, would you like a coffee before the evening?" I said, "No, I'm going to be tasting tea with Bruce tonight. Don't want to get too jittery."
That's right. All right, so let's move on to the third family. So we've done white tea, we've done green tea, and now we're going to move to the oolong family. And this is a photograph I shot in Taiwan a few summers ago in a garden in Hsinchu County. And this I had gotten there just as the bugs had arrived. So every year in this garden, they await the arrival of these little aphids, these little leaf hoppers that arrive, and they just nibble a bit on the tea leaves, make a little blemish on them, which changes the chemistry of that bush, those leaves, and makes one of the world's most interesting, most beautiful, most delicious teas called Oriental Beauty. So that's what you're seeing with this woman here who has just picked a handful of that. And all the bushes here in this garden are short, and you have to sit on a little stool in order to pluck the tea leaves. The bushes are kept intentionally short because they want to make a very small landing strip for all those bugs that come in and focus their attention on the short bushes, and they don't have as much space to land on as they have if they were big bushes.
Right.
So,
isn't that something? Wow.
Yeah. And so Oriental Beauty, one of the great oolong teas of the year of the world, it all came about because of bugs biting that tea. Just remember this about oolongs: they can either be rolled or leaf form. You always want to drink them with multiple infusions. So you would never drink an oolong once and toss away the leaves. You would do it multiple times. Always shorter steeping time. So start with 2 minutes for your first steep, maybe 2 minutes, 15 seconds for your second one, 2 minutes and 30 seconds for your second steeping, and use water generally right off boil. 200 degrees would be a safe place to start. Here you see a rolled oolong from one of the neighboring counties there in Taiwan, and see how emerald green it is. Each one of these kernels is comprised of 2 leaves and a bud that have been rolled up. So when these open up and rehydrate, it's like a flower that blooms. So they come back to life. So you have to give them room to do that. This is one of the classic green oolongs from Taiwan called Jade Oolong. And these are my instructions for steeping it. But when I start people on their oolong journey, we often start with this type of tea.
So then would I be right in sort of taking that advice and something you said earlier, that you then wouldn't want to pack this into like an infuser? You want to give it that space to...
No, you actually, you want a small teapot. So when I make this tea, I use a pot that's no bigger than my hand. And you put, if you were to fill it up, the lid would pop off of it because the tea would expand and literally blow the lid off of your teapot. Yeah. So here you see in that same tea garden where the bugs are arriving, you see all the pickers there picking the teas,
and they're all sitting. Are they sitting on?
They're sitting on little buckets, and they're protecting themselves from that hot sun. So that's why they're so draped as they are out there. And you often see this even in when I'm in Darjeeling in the mountains of near Mount Everest. You'll see women out there with picking tea holding an umbrella or putting it in their backs so they'll be out there with an umbrella harvesting tea. So oolongs can differ by how long they're roasted. We have light roast, medium roast, dark roast. A lot of the roasting used to be done with charcoal. So now let's go to Taiwan and just peek into one of these old production factories from the 1930s, where what my friend Norman Shue is making tea. And I happened in his place on a Sunday afternoon, and I yelled out, "Norman!" He said, "I'm back here." And this is what I saw when I went in. See those baskets like we saw 200 years ago in China? Still going on. Now he's already done some roasting, some rolling of this tea. It has to go through this process several times. And he's smelling it. He's making sure it doesn't get over roasted, tossing it, cooling it evenly. And then he's going to put it back over. He's going to put it back over the roasting charcoal to give it a second roasting. And he'll do this over and over again. So it may take several steps in order to make this oolong. So that's why oolongs, especially rolled oolongs, are often so expensive, is because there's so much work that goes into making.
Oh, look at that.
Tea like that.
And so he set that entire basket over the charcoal opening.
Yes, you see he already has one back there that's still sitting there. So each time that he goes through the steps of rolling it, cooling it, and then roasting it another time and another time until he gets it just to the right stage that he wants it.
Oh,
so this is really old school.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
So let's just go down the road to my Buddhist friend Wu Da, who is from Dayton, Ohio, believe it or not, who came to Taiwan years ago, and he writes a lot of books. His original name was Aaron Fisher. Now he goes by the name of Wu Da, and he's the Global Tea Hut there. And we'll show you experience of having tea in total silence. And we drank tea for 45 minutes in total silence and did 16 infusions. See how small that teapot is?
Look at that, right. That's no bigger than your fist, you were saying.
That's right. And we were drinking, these bowls are 1,000 years old.
I'm sorry, 1,000 years old?
1,000-year-old. And then the tea that is in this pot was harvested from a 1,000-year-old tea tree in the Yunnan province of China.
Wow.
Now, you don't rush this experience. So we took 45 minutes. And so this, I don't know which steeping this is. See how he's moving around? And he'll go back to make sure everybody gets evenly infused teas here. This is the Gung Fu method. Remember we talked about Konggu tea earlier? Right. Well, there is a Konggu or Gung Fu method of making tea, a discipline. And this is what we're doing here in this the Taiwanese oolong tea ceremony.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Not,
And
not
so
just the vessels for the tea, but knowing that the very flavor that you're having is in an ancient um, an ancient vessel of that.
right.
Like that's incredible, Bruce.
Well, it is, and it's a beautiful ritual. So it's a very moving experience. It's
Sure.
quiet. It's meditation. You lose track of the world. You lose track of time, and you get what sometimes we call tea drunk. You just enter a different space.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's fabulous.
All right, so that's the ending of the oolong family. So let's go on to we have two more, and this is the one that most of us know. This is the black tea family, which is heavily oxidized. So you see, we've come from little to no oxidation, some oxidation, a little more oxidation, heavy oxidation. Now we're into the black tea world, and also the temperatures of the waters. Each time we go to a darker color, the water temperature comes up. So now we're moving towards boiling water, 200 to 212. This is a photograph I shot in Calcutta a few years ago. This man is the tea taster for Tetley, which is one of the largest tea producers in the world. And so every day he will taste about 450 teas in this tasting room in Calcutta. And his purpose is to taste the teas before they are brought to auction. So you see his spittoon, which is on wheels, follows him wherever he goes. Now here's the tea from Boston, black tea.
Look at that. So, we know that.
So Josiah knows this tea. Do you want to share the provenance of this tea?
Yeah, and so friends, there. So this is tea from attributed to the Boston Tea Party, and you see that they put the date that this was picked up on December 17th. 1773. The Tea Party happened the evening before, and there is a reference to the shore of Dorchester Neck there. And so I always love to use the word tea detritus. So once the tide came in after the destruction of the tea at low tide, it picked all of it up. Leaves were on the surface, unsteeped. Even in the morning, you could see that detritus on the surface level. Now, this tea debris field went to this area being referenced here, Dorchester Neck, and as the tide receded, deposited this tea. Some of it might have been stuck still inside remnants of tea chests. And of course, we are privileged enough to have here the Robinson tea chest, the only known surviving tea chest of the Boston Tea Party, which survived almost entirely intact. It is missing its lid. So perhaps there were tea remnants inside any of these wooden pieces left over. And so someone had the wherewithal the morning after and said, we might want to remember this and pack it there inside and keep it as a memento. And we do know that there are a handful of vials that do contain tea that are attributed to coming from that cargo of tea.
And you notice on here, it doesn't say from the Boston Tea Party, because there was no term, the Boston Tea Party.
Correct.
For many years. So it was
Correct.
it was called the destruction of the tea in Boston Harbor. Sometimes they call it the Tea Rebellion, but never Boston Tea Party until much, much later.
And so looking at seeing the tea leaves and seeing some of the images that we've just seen, do you have a comment on the leaf that we're seing here? And
this, of course, it's definitely a black tea, and it was one of three. It could have been, probably wasn't bohea. I suspect it might have been Kangu. Because of the dark color on it. So that would be my guess. I tried to get them to open that bottle and give me some time to give it a shot, but nobody would do that.
I imagine the response is keep asking. Well, and I will reference one of our other vials that exist that is actually on display here at the museum. And it's actually in liquid form. We have a vial that was loaned to us by the Old North Church in Boston, formerly, Christ Church, the one if by land, two if by sea, from the north end of the Paul Revere famous ride. And yes, that tea there has been encapsulated with some liquid. And so it's actually brewed tea inside this vial. So we always say curiously preserved in liquid form.
Yeah, yeah. So I have had opportunity to hold that little bottle. So I wasn't allowed to drink out of it either.
Yeah, well, that would be a shot of tea. Who knows how many?
All right, so let's look at modern day where tea comes from. Sri Lanka, originally called Ceylon. We didn't have tea growing on that island until after our American Civil War. And one of the great tea producers there, of course, was this man named Lipton, who arrived there and bought several coffee plantations and turned them into tea plantations in the 1860s. So Sri Lanka, you generally have teas growing in the lowlands, here like in a rainforest, or you have tea growing in the highlands. I think it's just a beautiful vista of tea bushes everywhere, and you have occasionally a eucalyptus tree that's been purposefully planted just to give it a little dappled shade. There's lots of water up there, and it looks like the highlands of Scotland. As a matter of fact, a lot of the early planters were from Scotland. And you still see in the cottages, in the hotels, in the bars that are scattered throughout this area, still bear a lot of Scottish names.
Wow.
And here's how we turn green tea into black tea on an industrial scale. And this again was started by the Scots and the Brits in the 1860s, and now that's why this area of the world is one of the largest exporters of tea, mainly black tea. And here you see the leaves that are being rolled. They're coming out of this cylinder, and that is circulating across these ribs, and that gently rolls these leaves and expresses just a little bit of juice. And when that juice starts to come out, oxidation starts to take place. So this is how green tea becomes black tea in an industrial stage. But here you see the tea being harvested in the fields around throughout Sri Lanka, and you see the plants, the new growth. It only harvests the new growth of leaves. As soon as the leaves are harvested, they are immediately trucked quickly over to the factory, so the manufacturing can begin. You can't take it down the hill, it can't miles away. You have to do it right there, because again, oxidation is not your friend here. You want it to be controlled, and so you can't leave it on a truck for several hours. You have to get it immediately to the plant. Wow. And where the first step is actually withering. So here you see large troughs of fresh tea leaves that are placed, and air is being circulated through here, and some of the moisture starts to dissipate. This in Sri Lanka just generally takes about 12 hours of doing this withering before we start the rolling process. So after the tea is withered, it's tossed down these long chutes that go all the way down to the first floor, to that big machine we saw earlier. And here you see this machine. A lot of these were made in either Scotland or Ireland originally. Now some of them are made there in Colombo. And then after the tea is rolled, it's put onto an oxidation table. And you see the green leaves now. What color are they? They're now red or brown. So oxidation is taking place. Mm-hmm. Then you must halt that oxidation. Otherwise, you're going to have rotten tea. So here we put tea through a long system of conveyor belts that will heat the tea, take away the moisture, stop the oxidation process. Then it comes out, and then you have to grade it into the different size of leaves. And each one of those grades has a certain price to it and a certain tea taste profile. So this is the way we get it into the grading system. And eventually, all the tea that went to Boston was packed into huge chests, and that's the way it was for years, up until just a few years ago. It's hard now in third world countries to get wood, so now almost all the tea is packaged in like fertilizer bags like this, and this is the way we get most of our tea these days.
I kept my souvenir after we got a shipment from our friends
Yeah.
And yeah, the East India Company, who I believe they transitioned out of selling tea product, but I saw that box. I said, "Don't throw that away. Hold on." Got my knife, cut that out.
It's a rare prize. So this is one of my favorite tea growing areas of the world. This is the mountains of the Himalayas, where on a clear day you might see Mount Everest in the background, and 86 gardens on that mountain.
Wow.
Growing 4% of the world's teas, and Darjeeling is its name at the top of India. At the bottom of India, and near Chennai in the Blue Mountains, you have Nilgiri. And here you see one of the newest tea operations there that is completely woman run. So we have women who are picking the tea, women who are working in this beautiful new, what they call tea studio, making tea by hand, and they're keeping most of the profits for it. So this is really encouraging to see things like this going on in India today.
Well, that looks like a lovely place to go to work every day. Look at that. It's gorgeous.
And then the tea I have every morning for breakfast comes from this area of the world, 850 gardens right above Bangladesh. This is the most eastern part of India, and it's called Assam. And so tea was found growing there. The bushes were found growing there in the 1830s. And so all the tea bushes in the world generally come from either China or Assam. So the tea plant is a camellia plant. If it originated in China, and it's called Camellia sinensis. If it originated in Assam, it's called Camellia assamica. And so all tea bushes generally come from one of those two areas by heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the tea I drink every morning, a tippy tea. You see all the beautiful golden tips in here. It's very mellow. And it's a single estate tea. It comes from one garden. This is the grade of it. I steep it for at 212 for 4 or 5 minutes, and I can't start my day without this beautiful black tea. Of course, and tonight we want to just tell you that the official tea of the Boston Tea Party Ships Museum, is named for Abigail Adams in the Abigail's Tea Room.
Yeah, which I will end the evening with. I did brew. This is on site. I do prefer this blend as well as the Kongu. That they're very similar. Yeah, oh, that's great.
So this is when I put together this blend. It's a mixture of teas from the all across the British Empire. Mm-hmm. So you not only have Chinese teas, but you also have Sri Lanka and India and Kenyan teas together. So
it's really a wonderful flavor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a beautiful blend that people from, whether they're from London and want a bit of milk in their tea, or if they're from Alabama and want to pour it over ice, it works either way. Mm-hmm.
I say, move aside, Lipton. Oh.
Let's see if we got any more questions before we move.
All right. Yes, there's the Q&A slide. So if you've got another question based off of the second half of our presentation here, go ahead and throw that in here. I guess while I'm waiting for a question or two to come in, we're talking about tea going all the way back to 18th century, and now we've shown some of the modern, and I guess in terms of the plants, you also mentioned tonight that you drank tea from 1,000-year-old plant. And so I guess my question would be sort of that flavor palette. Are we truly, say, drinking from that 1,000-year-old plant per se? Is that the flavor that they would have experienced 1,000 years ago, or does over the centuries the flavor change a little bit?
It would be that 1,000-year-old tree was, and let me just say, a camellia plant, if left on its own, can grow to the size of a tree, but it doesn't because we keep it trimmed.
You want the tea, yeah, right?
So there are places in Yunnan where there are these ancient trees, and you have to actually get a certificate from the government to pick those leaves, and they have scaffolding that's built around the tree. You can't just skinny up the bark. They had to build a scaffolding around it, and you go up and harvest that tea. And the teas from that area of the world are very earthy. And these ancient teas have that earthiness to them. But when you talk about the quality of tea, let me say this, that the tea that people drank in Boston was nothing compared to what the tea they were consuming back in China. Because it was, well, for one thing, it was probably 5 or 6 years old, way past its prime. And we didn't know how to make it. So although we've talked about cooler temperatures for green tea, nobody knew that. So you just abused it with boiling water as hard as you could. You sometimes pour milk into it. And I always say that the reason we drank so much sugar with it was just to make it taste good, because I'm sure it really didn't taste with the way that we experience teas today.
Oh, Bruce, if only you'd been around then to,
I could have sold a lot of books.
Colonists how to drink their Hyson and Singlo.
I just sold the rights to 2 of my books, Social History and UT Companion, to the Chinese, and they're being translated into Mandarin.
Oh,
and
wonderful!
Will be available in the Chinese market very, very soon. So let's close out tonight by talking about the final family, and that's the dark tea family, which would include these teas: pu'ers, brick teas, and maybe a tuo cha, which is a little bird's nest of tea. Dark teas. This is a pu'er, and I photographed this in Paris probably 10 years ago, and where Jane Pettigrew, my writing friend, and I were drinking tea, and we commented how good that pu'er was, and he said, "Oh, well, it'll be 25 years before it gets to where it should be." So pu'ers are teas that get better with age, and so they generally have a date on them, and you store these away like a good wine, in your vault. And if you collect enough of them, you can send your child to college one day by selling some of these. So there's a great market for these aged pu'ers. And while we're here, let's talk about brick tea. I got a question from someone who sent a question into the Boston Tea Party Ships Museum this week, asking about if the tea thrown overboard in Boston was brick tea. And this is another one of my crusades, is to just tell people that it was not brick tea. It was all loose tea. So a brick of tea like this, yes, these were being made in China and had been being made for centuries, but they didn't go to the west via Canton or Amoy into Holland. Tea bricks were shipped on the backs of camels or horses, sometimes across the Tea Horse Road or the Silk Road, across to Tibet and different areas of Tajikistan that we know today, and or they would go into Russia, and these were sometimes treated as currency. So if you left China, you would never leave home without one of these. This was your American Express card of the day, because you could take these and trade for anything as you went across the Mongolia steppes. You always wanted to have tea bricks with you, but they were not tossed into Boston Harbor. And I know the Boston Tea Party Ships Museum sells these in a gift shop, but they were never on board the ships there.
We have a nice little disclaimer informing our guests of such.
Yes, there's another museum in Boston that actually has a non-disclaimer that says these were tossed in Boston Harbor, and we won't point out who they are, but it ain't necessarily so. Sporting Investor. So that's my sermon on brick teas.
And there it is. Kimberly Rose is asking, I've heard that the pu'er tea was banned in the colonies, or that tea was shipped to the colonies were mixed with some other items, making it subpar. Are either of these true?
No, I don't know. I've never seen anything about it being banned, and I see no reason for it to be banned. It was just we were drinking loose leaf teas. We had made the English furniture market had made all these beautiful tea caddies, and you cannot, no matter how hard you try, you cannot put these into a beautiful tea caddy unless you break it up.
Right.
It just didn't happen. There may be a few that you might find in a museum in London as oddities, but they were never imported in any great quantity into the by the East India Company into London. And so I guess I take it for granted to know that everybody knows that all the tea that came into the colonies legally had to come from the East India Company. So if the East India Company didn't have brick teas, there were no brick teas coming in legally into the colonies.
Let's see. Someone is saying hi, Bruce. Susie Killian is saying hi and says to say hi to Shelley for her. And she's going to be in Boston in 1 week. That's fantastic.
All right.
You're
go by and visit the museum.
Yeah, well, she's asking, what are the teas that we serve? So we do serve, of course, the highlight, which is the 5 teas that were thrown over. Those 2 green teas and the 3 black. And that experience of being able to learn about the event and then come up and taste that history, to see, Bruce's interpretation off of his, knowledge and traveling the world of what those teas might have tasted like. And it's just wonderful.
So I'll say this too, that on our website, we offer this. This is the 5 teas. So you can buy a kit of the 5 teas that launched a revolution. It's in our sampler sets at elmwoodinn.com, but you can have your own little tea party at home with these.
You could, although I'd advise drinking them and not dumping them in the tub. But
That's
if
right.
that's your revolutionary spirit, I suppose just don't tell Bruce.
That's right. Huzzah.
All right. Well, let's we just look back over here at the questions real quick. Were the brick teas widely used out of the Hudson Bay Company forts or out west?
I don't know if the Hudson Bay Company. I can't tell you that. I don't know.
I mean, if they
Hudson Bay, they would have gotten theirs. Would they gotten theirs from the? It's a Hudson Bay Company. Was that French or that Dutch? Not French.
It might have been French a little bit up there. I trying to recall back my Canadian history, but coming down through a westward expansion and all that, we do know that once we're beyond the 18th century, where those tea bricks come into play. I mean, if the brick travels well,
it does travel well, but I can't, through my investigation of invoices and what people were buying, major traders were buying at the time, I could find no evidence of that. And I have this conversation often with Civil War reenactors too, who come into my shop and load up on these to say, well, they want to use them around the campfire night because this is the tea that the soldiers would have had, and I don't think they would have. I really don't.
Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly. Keeping us all on track here. The British Hudson Bay is an English company. So
there lies your answer. They didn't.
English tea?
No, there were no brick teas there either. Now, if I'm open to, if somebody finds something, send it to me. I'll say that.
All right. I think that is about everyone that I see.
Okay.
Oh, are brick teas good tasting?
I drank in China 3 years ago a brick tea that was 75 years old.
Oh,
yeah.
And
it tasted like brick tea. So it's interesting. And of course, when you break it up if you're sitting in a yurt in Mongolia, you break it up and put it into yak's milk with salt and barley, and you churn it till it has the consistency of potato soup. Oof. And it gives you some vitamins in an area that has very little vegetation. It gives you protein and sustenance and warms you against the cold wind. So therein lies the goodness of that brick tea in Mongolia.
More of a meal than say a beverage.
That's right. Yeah. All right, so let's just take a short review. So the tea families we looked at tonight are white, green, oolong, black, ended with the dark tea family. And then what about herbals and rooibos and all those things? Are they teas? Well, in the true term of tea, no, they're not. They are herbals. or tisanes, but they're not a true tea. Although we use 25% of our sales these days are non-teas. That's how much it's grown over the years. So we end with 6 steps towards better tea. How can you make better tea each time you start? And I often have to begin by saying, well, you need 2 apparatus. You need both a tea kettle and a teapot because they are not the same. So you heat the water here, you make tea over here, and you need those 2 apparatus to do that with. Coffee makers are not designed to make tea. So a lot of people these days have coffee, very expensive coffee makers. They expect the tea to taste really good out of them. And if you ever open up one of those little pods of the tea, you see it's the cheapest tea. It's like the bohea of the coffee world. So don't even try to go there. Collect several different tea wares of various sizes and traditions, because every tea deserves its own ritual. So as we've gone through tonight, we've seen teas that should be made in very small pots. We have teas that should be you make them in larger pots. So have a variety of tea wares. Be sure your tea is fresh. Keep it stored away out of the air. And most tea will keep a year or 2, but if you're not drinking it within 2 years, you're not drinking enough tea. So keep it stored in something like what Jane Austen would have had, of this beautiful tea caddy like this. Beautiful. You'll see these all over Boston. And because we were great tea drinkers at the time of the Boston Tea Party, so you had these beautiful wooden chests called tea caddies. They were locked, and you had sealed compartments that you keep your tea in. Even today, you can buy an apparatus like this, keep your tea in, keep it fresh. It looks beautiful. And just remember that the lighter the tea, the cooler the water, the darker the tea, the hotter the water. So start here with green teas, 165, 175, oolongs approaching 200, and then black teas you can go up to boiling. But that's so key to making good tea time after time. So I'll leave you here with images of a couple of my best-selling books. So if you're interested in the stories about the Boston Tea Party, you go to the Social History of Tea. If you want to know times, temperatures, tastings, and how tea is made and where it comes from, you go to the New Tea Companion. If you'd like to taste the 5 different tea families, you can go to our website and get this tea families tasting set and taste the 5 different teas, one from each of the tea families. If you have a question or a comment, or if you find out that the Hudson Bay Company was actually selling brick tea like crazy, send me an email at bruce@elmwoodinn.com, and I'll appreciate that. So we've covered a lot of ground tonight. You may have a few more questions, so let's see if we do.
All right. Well, while we do that, I will share my screen back again and just walk through a couple of slides here. And so it's just been a wonderful time. Again, Bruce has made this evening simple, making tea a little more approachable, I think. It's been a wonderful conversation and a journey of tea on its own. If you are interested in these tea talks and tea tying back to the Boston Tea Party, we encourage you to come back and check out some of our other tea talks. A number of them are online. And next month, if you're going to keep following us, we're going to look into the tea consignees, those hand-picked merchants by the East India Company that were deemed to sell the tea here in America. And so we're going to be kind of evaluating the loyalist perspective and during the tea crisis here in Boston. So that's next month on the 27th. Of course, I will plug Bruce again there with his information. And if you are finding yourself in Danville, Kentucky, go and check out the brick and mortar store. Looks like a lovely place to visit. There's all of his handles there. And then, of course, keep checking our website out and our handles. Visit us often. You can also find the links to all of our virtual offerings there. And we too carry Bruce's book proudly online and in our shop. as well as another a whole assortment of games and souvenirs and accoutrements. And we have, of course, Bruce's tea supplies, and we have a number of other flavors. One of the other flavors that I love, Bruce, that you supply us with is that strawberry apple. I feel I have raised my children on it the last 10 years.
Me too.
And I truly want to thank you all for joining us on this journey of tea and sort of examining the teas of modern day with some throwbacks to their origins. So again, thank you all for joining us. Bruce, it's truly been a pleasure. And from one Commonwealth to another, thank you so much.
Thank you, Josiah. It's been a real thrill.
All right. Well, so long, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Bruce.
Bye-bye.